I can speak 7 languages." The room fell into a stunned hush. A murmur rippled through the air like a current. One of the board members leaned back in his chair, stifling a smirk. A pale boy sitting beside his crisply dressed mother scoffed audibly, but it was Principal Edwin Hargrave who reacted most severely. "You can what?" he said, as if the words themselves had offended him. Malik stood in his scuffed dress shoes, wearing a pressed white shirt tucked into trousers that were slightly too big for him. His hair was neatly cut, his hands clasped respectfully in front of him. His skin, a warm shade of mahogany, caught the light from a stained glass window behind him. I said, "I can speak 7 languages." A beat of silence passed before laughter, soft and cruel, bubbled from the corner of the room. 7, Hargrave repeated, stepping out from behind his polished mahogany desk. He glanced down at Malik's admissions folder, then back up at him with a look of disdain. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No, sir." "And where exactly does a child like you," his eyes narrowed, "learn 7 languages?" "My father," Malik began, then stopped. Not this time. Not the lie he used to tell himself. Not the story of a professor he never met. "My father is the night watchman here," he said. "He works the front gate." Someone in the room coughed loud, pointed. Another chuckled. Principal Hargrave snorted. "So, let me get this straight. The gatekeeper's son is fluent in 7 languages." Malik said nothing. He turned to the admissions board. "We're wasting time." Then he looked back at him. His voice dropped to a low, cold register. "You do realize, young man, that Whitstone Academy is the most respected private institution in Charleston. We've educated senators' sons, CEOs' daughters, even a few foreign diplomats." "I know that, sir." "Well, then let me be perfectly clear. Admitting you into this school would be a stain on its history, a smear, an embarrassment." Gasps didn't come this time, just the low, satisfied hum of people nodding to each other. "And why is that?" Malik asked quietly. "Because you are not like the others," Hargrave said. "You are not from our world, and let's not pretend we don't all see what's in front of us." Malik's fingers curled slightly. His voice trembled, but not with fear. "Because I'm black," he said, "and poor." Hargrave's mouth twisted, but he didn't deny it. One of the women on the board finally spoke. "Really, Mr. Hargrave?" But he raised his hand. "Don't pretend to be surprised. The boy should be grateful we let him in the building." Malik took a deep breath. His heart thundered. His knees wanted to buckle. But he thought of his father's rough hands packing his lunch that morning, of his grandmother's fingers adjusting his collar. And he began. The smirks began to fade. Eyes widened. The air grew still. "Merci," he finished in English, his voice steady. "I told you I can speak 7 languages." If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what this moment meant to you. No one moved. No one laughed. Principal Hargrave's face had gone rigid, as if he'd swallowed something sharp. His hands fumbled for his handkerchief. I suppose we might consider," he began. But Malik cut him off. "I didn't come here to beg," he said. "I came to learn." The boy who had laughed now stared at his shoes. The woman who had coughed looked anywhere but at Malik. And the silence in the room was no longer doubt. It was shame. Outside, Malik's father leaned against the school gate in his Navy security uniform, watching the doors with tired but proud eyes. When his son stepped out, he straightened. "How'd it go, son?" Malik smiled faintly, the corner of his shirt lifting in the breeze. "They said I couldn't." "But you did." "Yes," he said, and they listened. They didn't hold hands walking back toward the old pickup truck, but they didn't have to. The silence between them was full of truth, and something more powerful than any rejection, dignity. Later that evening, the sun dipped low over Charleston, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement outside the Johnson home, a modest duplex near the rail yards, where the walls were thin, the floorboards creaked, and the scent of fried cabbage lingered from a neighbor's kitchen. Inside, Malik sat at the small kitchen table, his backpack still on, his shirt collar slightly wrinkled from the day. His father, Joseph Johnson, stirred a pot of grits on the stove. His security badge still clung to his shirt, and his boots left faint smudges of clay dust on the floor. "Eat something, son," he said, not turning around. "You barely touched your lunch." "I wasn't hungry," Malik replied. Joseph glanced over his shoulder. "But now?" Malik shrugged. "A little." He set down a steaming bowl in front of him and placed a jar of molasses beside it. "Put a little of that on. It helps when the day's been bitter." Malik smiled weakly but didn't move. Joseph sat across from him, resting his elbows on the worn tabletop. His hands were still dusty from pulling a stuck gate off its hinges that morning. "So," he said, "they hurt you?" "They didn't want to, but I made them." Joseph's eyes gleamed with pride. "That's my boy." Malik stirred the grits absently. "They laughed at me." He nodded. "Folks laugh when they're scared or when they don't understand. They said letting me in would stain their school." His face tightened, jaw shifting slightly. People got strange ideas of what's clean and what's dirty. Malik looked down. "He called me a stain, Daddy." There was a long pause. Then Joseph reached into his breast pocket and pulled out an old pocket knife dull with age. "See this," he said, laying it gently on the table. "This belonged to my daddy. He carried it every day to work in the shipyards." Malik nodded, familiar with the story. "He told me, you ain't got to cut nobody with it. Just carry it, so you don't forget you come from men who built ships, not from stains." Malik traced a finger along the knife's surface. "Sometimes I wish I really had a special dad. You know, a professor or a senator or—" Joseph leaned in, cutting him off with just a look. "You got a special dad." Malik looked up. "I may not teach at a university, but I built my son a mind stronger than any ivory tower." Malik blinked quickly, his eyes stinging. "I know." Joseph softened. "You don't have to prove anything to those folks." "But I want to," Malik said. "I want them to see. Not just me, but every kid who walks past that gate and thinks that school ain't for me. I want them to know it can be." Joseph sat back, staring at his son like he was something carved from starlight. "Then they gonna learn today." That night, while the city hummed outside, Malik spread his notebooks across the table. French verbs, Japanese kanji, Swahili phrases. The words wrapped around him like armor. His father fell asleep in his chair, boots still on, one hand resting on the open classified ads page, but Malik kept studying. The next morning, Whitstone Academy called. Joseph answered. He said very little, just nodded once, and then turned to Malik as he ate toast with butter and jelly. "You start Monday," he said. Malik paused mid-bite. "They said yes. They said they can't ignore what they saw." He grinned, but the smile quickly faded. "He won't make it easy for me." "No, he won't. But you don't need easy. You just need to remember who you are." Monday came like thunder. Whitstone's campus was pristine, with old oaks casting dappled shade over manicured lawns. Students in polished loafers and monogrammed blazers filed through stone archways, laughter echoing like wind chimes. Malik stepped off the bus in his second-hand shoes and thrifted trousers, clutching a backpack full of borrowed books and handwritten notes. Eyes followed him. A hush spread as he walked toward the main building. No one said hello. No one smiled. He found his homeroom, room 4C, and paused at the door. Then he stepped inside. 22 students sat in rows, perfectly aligned. Every desk gleamed. The teacher, Miss Whitaker, looked up and blinked at him as if someone had brought a ghost into the room. "You must be Malik Johnson." Miss Whitaker hesitated a second too long before pointing to the empty seat in the back. "Take a seat." As Malik moved through the aisle, he heard them, not loudly but loud enough. Is he really the gate guy's kid? Can he really talk all those languages? Maybe he's just a parrot. The words stuck like gum on the sole of a shoe, annoying, dirty, impossible to ignore. Miss Whitaker handed out copies of To Kill a Mockingbird. Malik opened to the first page and began reading quietly to himself. But his mind wasn't in Macomb County. It was inside that admissions office, standing tall while the world tried to shrink him. At lunch, he sat alone. No one offered a seat. No one asked his name. His peanut butter sandwich tasted like cardboard. Then, just as he was packing up to leave, a girl with auburn hair and braces sat across from him. "You really speak 7 languages?" she asked. Malik looked up. "Yes." The girl shrugged. "Cool. I can barely pass English." And just like that, the wall cracked if only slightly. That night, Joseph waited up for him. "How was it?" "Tough," Malik said. "You okay?" "I will be." He smiled. "That's my boy." He went to bed with his books beside his pillow, the knife under his mattress, and the fire in his chest still burning strong. He had stepped through the gate, and now there was no turning back. By Wednesday, the whispers had grown teeth. Malik walked the halls of Whitstone Academy with a kind of practiced calm, chin high, books tight to his chest, eyes ahead. But each step was heavier than the last. Every corner held a murmur. Every classroom a stare. He wasn't just the new kid anymore. He was that kid, the gatekeeper's son, the boy who made the principal squirm, the boy who dared speak back. In algebra, 2 boys passed a note across his desk. He didn't read it, but he saw the word mudblood scrawled on the front, a slur borrowed from fantasy, aimed straight at his reality. He tore it in half without a word, and kept solving the equation. In history, the teacher skipped over his hand, even when it was the only one raised. And at lunch, the table where the auburn-haired girl had sat with him on Monday now had a new sign, reserved. Malik didn't bother asking who it was for. He ate beneath the magnolia tree instead, just past the football field where no one went unless they were hiding. He didn't cry. He had promised himself he wouldn't. That Friday, Principal Hargraves summoned him to his office. He stepped in to find him standing at the window, hands behind his back, watching the grounds as if he were inspecting troops. "Mr. Johnson," he said without turning, "I've received some feedback." Malik didn't move. "About what?" He turned slowly. "About your presence here. It's causing disruption." "I haven't broken any rules." "No, but you've certainly upset the balance." Malik narrowed his eyes. "The balance?" "This school functions best when students know their place, when everyone understands expectations. You, unfortunately, continue to challenge that structure." "With respect, sir," Malik said, "isn't that what learning is supposed to do?" Hargraves' expression hardened. "This isn't a debate club, Mr. Johnson. It's an institution of discipline and heritage, and intelligence doesn't belong here if it's not dressed in the right uniform." He smiled thinly. "You're clever. That's clear. But cleverness doesn't equal belonging." Malik's fists clenched at his sides. "Are you threatening to expel me?" "Of course not," he said, voice smooth as oil. "But let's not pretend we didn't already stretch the rules to let you in. I earned my place. Maybe, but don't expect everyone else to agree." He turned back to the window. "You're dismissed." Outside the office, Malik exhaled slowly, his heart pounding, his palms slick with sweat. The walls of Witt's stone didn't want him. They never had. That afternoon during language lab, Miss Whitaker announced a new assignment, a paired project on global cultures. Each student was to choose a country, study its customs and language, and present in class in both English and the country's native tongue. Malik's heart soared. Finally, a chance to speak, to show what he could do. He smiled, raised his hand, but Miss Whitaker didn't look his way. "Partners will be assigned," the teacher said curtly, then began calling out names. "Ethan and Olivia, Marcus and Caleb, Emily and Jackson." Malik waited. At the end of a list, Miss Whitaker hesitated. "And Malik, you'll be working alone." A few students chuckled. Malik nodded slowly. "May I choose any country?" "I suppose," Miss Whitaker said, "as long as your pronunciation is authentic." Malik caught the edge in her voice, but he smiled anyway. "I'll present in Swahili." The room went quiet. Later that night, he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by open notebooks and index cards. His father worked a double shift and wouldn't be home until morning. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional bark from a dog down the block. Malik read aloud. "Jina langu and I Malik. Nafarahi kuzungumza nani leo. My name is Malik. I'm happy to speak with you today." He practiced again and again. His accent tightened. His voice grew stronger. But somewhere around midnight, he paused. He looked around the small kitchen, the cracked linoleum floors, the photos of his grandmother in her Sunday best on a wall, and suddenly a lump rose in his throat. "Why am I the only one who has to prove everything?" he whispered. There was no answer, just the sound of his own breath and the ticking of the clock. The following Monday, he stood before his class alone at the front. His voice rang clear. His posture was perfect. He didn't fumble. He didn't stutter. "Jina langu and I Malik." And as he finished the final sentence, silence followed. It wasn't mockery this time. It wasn't laughter. It was stillness. Then somewhere in the middle of the room, a single pair of hands clapped. Then another and another. Miss Whitaker didn't join in, but she didn't stop it either. Malik met the teacher's eyes. There was no smile, but there was a flicker, just a flicker, of something like recognition. That afternoon, as he walked home under the soft gold light of late September, Malik realized something. The walls of which stone were high, but his voice was louder, and if he kept speaking long enough, they'd have no choice but to listen. On Tuesday morning, something strange happened. Malik walked into room 4C and found a folded piece of paper on his desk. It wasn't scribbled in pencil or stained with cafeteria ketchup like the others he'd received before. This one was carefully creased, written in clean cursive, and sealed with a single strip of blue tape. He hesitated. The class hadn't settled yet. Miss Whitaker stood near the board, sipping coffee and pretending not to watch. Students milled around, chatting, laughing, shifting backpacks. Malik opened the letter slowly, bracing himself. But what he read was not what he expected. You were amazing yesterday. I didn't even know Swahili was a real language. I hope you do more. Don't stop talking. Just one initial. No name. No signature. He glanced around the room. No one looked his way. Everyone seemed locked in their own teenage conversations about volleyball practice, math quizzes, and who was bringing what to the fall fundraiser. Malik folded the note and slipped it into his book. Something had shifted. That day at lunch, he returned to his usual spot under the magnolia tree. But before he could sit, 2 footsteps approached. It was the girl with auburn hair and braces, the same one who'd shared a seat with him briefly on the first day. Mind if I sit? The girl asked. Malik blinked. No, go ahead. They ate in quiet at first. Malik bit into his apple while the girl unwrapped a ham sandwich and took small, neat bites. I'm Ellie, she said at last. I know, Malik said, then softened. I remember from the roster. Ellie grinned. You're Malik, the boy who speaks everything. Malik smirked. Not everything, just 7. Well, it's more than me. I can barely pronounce croissant. That made Malik laugh, a small, genuine laugh that warmed the edge of his guarded heart. For the first time, the lunch hour didn't feel like exile. Later that week, Miss Whitaker announced the school's annual Founders' Day speech contest, a tradition dating back to 1897. Students were invited to submit a written speech on the roll of honor in modern education. The winner would deliver their speech to the entire student body, staff, and school board during the formal ceremony in the Whitstone Auditorium. The room buzzed with interest. It was a big deal. Scholarships had been handed out in past years. News outlets sometimes covered it, and students who won were usually legacy kids, polished, prepped, politically groomed. Malik didn't raise his hand. He didn't speak, but the idea burrowed deep into his mind, refusing to leave. That night at the kitchen table, he sat staring at a blank page. What's that? Joseph asked, walking in from his shift. He hung up his jacket, brushed the dust from his sleeves, and poured himself a glass of iced tea. Speech contest, Malik said. Joseph raised an eyebrow. You thinking of entering? I'm thinking of thinking. He chuckled. That means yes. Malik didn't smile. They don't want someone like me on that stage. He sat across from him. Maybe not, but that's exactly why you need to stand there. He hesitated, then began scribbling. Words poured out slowly, hesitantly at first, then stronger. He wrote about honor, not the kind found in school mottos or family crests, but the kind found in telling the truth even when no one wants to hear it. He wrote about showing up, about being underestimated, about what it means to belong when the world tells you not to. He didn't sleep much that night. By morning, the speech was done. He handed it to Miss Whitaker quietly with no fanfare. The teacher looked surprised. I'll review it, she said. Submissions close Friday. Thank you, Malik said, then returned to his seat. By Thursday, word had spread that Malik had submitted. A few students snickered in the hallway. One whispered, they're going to let the janitor's kids speak next. Malik ignored them, but deep down his stomach turned. On Friday morning, Miss Whitaker handed back the printed list of accepted entries. Malik scanned the page. Names filled the paper: Olivia Harris, Jackson Lee, Caleb Thornhill. He reached the bottom. There it was, Malik Johnson, the quiet kind of honor. He stared at the words, not breathing for a full 10 seconds. You're in. Ellie whispered behind him. Malik nodded. Miss Whitaker cleared her throat. The speech will be held next Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the auditorium. All students are required to attend. Presenters will be evaluated by a panel from the board. That evening, Joseph came home to find Malik pacing in the living room. You okay? I got in. He set down his lunchbox. Of course you did. I'll be speaking in front of everyone. Joseph pulled out his phone and started typing. What are you doing? Malik asked. Texting your grandma. She's going to want to iron your best shirt. Malik shook his head. I don't want to make it a big deal. Son, Joseph said, standing, it is a big deal. Malik looked at him, his tired eyes, his rough hands, the pride that lit his face brighter than the kitchen lamp. And in that moment, he didn't feel like the gatekeeper's son. He felt like someone who belonged. Next week, he would walk onto that stage. Not because they had made space for him, but because he had claimed it. The morning of the speech arrived, cloaked in nerves and October fog. Malik stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, smoothing the hem of his navy blue shirt. His grandmother had pressed it the night before, humming old hymns under her breath. His father, now dressed in his security uniform, stood nearby, watching with quiet pride. "You got this, son," Joseph said, adjusting his collar. "Remember, stand tall. Speak slow. Don't let your knees shake." Malik smiled nervously. "What if they boo me?" "Then boo right back," he said with a wink. They shared a brief hug. ChatGPT said, then he grabbed his speech, tucked carefully into a manila folder, and headed out the door. Whitstone Academy's auditorium had never been fuller. Rows of students in clean uniforms filled the cushioned seats. Teachers, staff, even a few board members were scattered among them. The stage was lit with soft amber light, framed by velvet curtains, and the school's ornate crest hung above like a crown. Malik stood backstage, waiting his turn, his hands trembling slightly. He could hear the muffled voice of the current speaker, a boy named Caleb Thornhill, delivering a speech that used words like heritage, legacy, and institutional pride, with the confidence of someone who had never once been told they didn't belong. Ellie appeared beside him, out of breath, holding a small paper bag. "Banana," she whispered. "For the nerves." Malik blinked. "You brought me a banana." "My mom says it helps with public speaking. Something about potassium. I don't know. Just take it." Malik laughed softly and took a bite. The applause for Caleb was polite but long. Then came the announcement. Our final speaker today is Malik Johnson with his speech entitled The Quiet Kind of Honor. The air in the auditorium shifted. Malik walked out into the light. He paused at the podium. His eyes scanned the crowd, so many eyes, some curious, some skeptical, a few blank. And in the far back, just near the exit, stood his father, still in uniform, cap in hand. He took a breath and began. When people speak of honor in schools like this one, they often think of plaques, trophies, old paintings of men with stern faces and polished shoes. But I've come to believe that honor is quieter than that. His voice was steady, stronger than he expected. Honor is getting up every morning to walk into a room where no one wants you. It's doing your work when no one calls on you. It's learning not to shrink when they whisper behind your back. A ripple moved through the room. Honor, he continued, is what my father shows when he fixes gates. No one notices. When he opens doors that others walk through without a second thought. He taught me that dignity doesn't come from titles. It comes from knowing who you are. He glanced toward Hargrave in the front row. His arms were crossed, face unreadable. This school wasn't built for someone like me. The stage was never meant to hold my voice. But here I am, not because I was given a place, but because I refused to leave quietly. There was a pause, a thick, waiting silence. Then he closed his speech. And if honor means anything today, let it mean this, that the quietest student can carry the loudest truth, and that we are not stains on the fabric. We are threads, strong ones, that hold history together. Silence, and then applause. It started slow, scattered, but then it grew. A girl in the third row stood, then another and another. Even some teachers clapped. Even Miss Whitaker, though only briefly. Principal Hargrave didn't move, but Joseph at the back of the room clapped with both hands, proud and loud. Afterward, backstage, Malik sat down on a folding chair and let his shoulders drop. Ellie appeared beside him again, still holding the now empty banana bag. "You nailed it," she said. Malik looked up. "You think so?" "You didn't just speak," Ellie said. "You made them listen." Just then, Miss Whitaker entered the green room, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "Your speech will be printed in next month's alumni journal." Malik blinked. "Really?" "It was honest," the teacher said. "That takes courage." Malik nodded, unsure what to say. And Miss Whitaker added more quietly, "Not everyone here will like you. But after today, no one will be able to say, you don't belong." That night, back home, Malik placed the speech beside his dictionary and closed his eyes. The stage may never have been built for him, but he had claimed it, and he wasn't leaving. By Monday morning, the glow of Malik's triumphant speech had already started to dim. ChatGPT said the applause was still a warm echo in his mind, but the mood in the halls of Whitstone Academy had turned colder, quieter, more calculated. It started with whispers again, sharper this time. Not the curious kind, but the kind dipped in poison. He made the whole thing about himself. His daddy's a janitor, right? What's honorable about that? He played the race card. That's how he got on stage. Malik heard them, every word. But he didn't flinch. He had promised himself that once he spoke, he would not retreat. Still, the atmosphere had changed. Even in class, something was different. Miss Whitaker was more curt than usual. When Malik raised his hand, he was overlooked. During group work, his name was left off assignments, forcing him to complete sections alone. And when he walked into the cafeteria, the same kids who had clapped now avoided eye contact. Only Ellie remained. At lunch, they sat under the magnolia tree, as they always did. Ellie picked at her salad, her brows furrowed. "They're talking about you," she finally said. "I know," Malik replied. "I don't get it. You were amazing. They think I took something that didn't belong to me. But it was a contest. You earned it." Malik took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the rustling branches above. "That doesn't matter to them. What matters is that someone like me wasn't supposed to win. Not in front of the board. Not in front of Hargrave." Ellie looked away. He didn't clap. "You know, I watched. I noticed." That afternoon, Malik was summoned once again to the principal's office. He stepped inside with his back straight, gripping his notebook tight to his side. Hargrave was seated behind his desk, a stack of letters beside him. He didn't look up as Malik entered. "Close the door," he said flatly. He did. Hargrave tapped one of the envelopes. "These are complaints from parents, donors, alumni." Malik said nothing. "They believe your speech was inappropriate, political, a disruption." It was honest. "That's your opinion. It's also true." Hargrave finally looked at him. "You're a clever boy, Mr. Johnson, but cleverness can be dangerous." Malik stepped forward. "Are you saying I broke a rule?" "No, but not all damage is done with rule-breaking." He met Hargrave's eyes. "Do you want me to apologize?" Hargrave folded his hands. "I want you to think carefully about what kind of attention you're bringing on yourself and on this institution." Malik tilted his head. "You mean I should stay quiet now?" "I mean," Hargrave said slowly, "that your place here is still conditional." A beat passed. Malik's heart thudded, but his voice remained calm. "I understand." "Good. You're dismissed." He left, teeth clenched, palms sweating. He didn't cry. Not yet. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with his father. Joseph was sorting through unpaid bills, his brow heavy with fatigue. Malik didn't want to worry him, but the silence in his chest was too loud. "They're trying to make me disappear," he said. Joseph looked up. "Who?" "Hargrave. The board. Everyone who thinks I don't belong." He leaned back slowly, setting the bills aside. "You want to disappear?" "No." "Then don't." Malik met his eyes. "You didn't stand up there to get their approval," Joseph said. "You stood because the truth needed to be heard. But they're threatening to take my place away. Then make it impossible for them to take it." Malik frowned. "How?" "Be undeniable. Not loud. Not flashy. Just undeniable. Work harder. Show more. Every day." Malik stared at the table, his mind swirling. "Even if they'll never accept me?" Joseph reached for his hand. "You're not here to be accepted. You're here to learn to grow, and maybe to open the gate for the next kid behind you." He didn't speak for a while, but the quiet between them was steady, like an oath. The next morning, Malik arrived at school before the bell rang. He went straight to the library, checking out 3 books on historical rhetoric, public speaking, and political resistance. By lunch, he had already outlined his next essay. By the end of the day, he had submitted a research proposal to the student journal. He started tutoring 3 younger students in French after school. He helped clean the language lab. She corrected the teacher's pronunciation of a Swahili phrase gently, without condescension. His days grew fuller, busier, sharper, and slowly the tide began to shift again. By the end of the week, one of the younger boys he tutored shyly handed him a thank-you note, scrawled in blue crayon. Miss Whitaker gave him a subtle nod after a classroom discussion. Even the lunchroom whispers grew quieter, not gone, but dimmed. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought. He had become undeniable. And in doing so, he turned the backlash into something else entirely. Fuel. November came with rain and early twilight. The leaves on the great oaks around Whitstone Academy turned brittle and copper-colored, drifting down like time itself was shedding something old. Malik walked through the halls with his books pressed tight to his chest, and his voice quieter now, but firmer. It was no longer the loudness of defiance that carried him. It was the weight of purpose. One morning, as he arrived early to the library, he found something unexpected taped to the door of the Student Council office where announcements were posted, a flyer for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The title itself was unusual. Whitstone had never acknowledged such things before. The small print read, "Seeking new student representatives to help shape policy and school culture. Open to all years." Ellie appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You thinking about it?" she asked. Malik scanned the flyer again. "It feels like a trap." "Or a door," Ellie said. "Maybe one you kicked open without realizing." Malik didn't respond right away. But later that day, between tutoring sessions and drafting another article for the student journal, he filled out the application. He submitted it quietly, without telling anyone, not even his father. A week later, Principal Hargrave called him to his office again. Malik walked in composed and ready. To his surprise, Hargrave wasn't alone. Mrs. Rivera, the vice principal, sat beside him, clipboard in hand, lips pressed tight. Her presence added a tension to the room that even Hargrave seemed to acknowledge. "Mr. Johnson," Hargrave said, motioning to the seat across from them. "We've reviewed your request to join the committee." Malik nodded slowly. It wasn't a request. It was an application. "Yes," Hargrave said, clasping his hands. "Be that as it may, this committee is new, still forming. It's sensitive." "I understand," Malik said. "Some of the board members have expressed concern," Hargrave continued. "They fear it may stir unnecessary conflict." "Conflict," Malik echoed. "Or reflection." Hargrave's jaw tightened. Mrs. Rivera broke in. "I believe, Principal Hargrave, that a student like Malik may bring valuable insight to the group, particularly if the school truly wishes to make progress." Hargrave shot her a look, but said nothing. Malik sat still, watching them both. Then he said, "If this committee is just for appearances, I'm not interested. But if it's meant to be real, meant to actually change something, I want in." Another silence. Then Hargrave leaned back. "We'll allow your participation, but with discretion. No speeches, no newsletters. Keep it internal." Malik stood. "I'll be respectful, but I won't be silent." As he left the room, he passed a teacher outside who avoided his eyes. It didn't matter. Another crack had appeared in the wall. The first committee meeting was held in a small, unused art room in the north wing of the school. Only 5 students showed up, 2 seniors, 1 sophomore, Ellie and Malik. Mrs. Rivera facilitated. The conversation began cautiously, comments about textbook diversity, classroom discussion policies, but then Malik spoke. He told them about the names he was called his first week, about being told he didn't belong, about the speech and the silence that followed. The others listened, and for the first time, he wasn't explaining himself. He was laying bricks, foundations. After the meeting, one of the seniors, a girl named Simone, came up to him. "I saw your speech," she said. "I didn't clap. I should have, but I didn't." Malik met her gaze. "Kaza," Simone added. "I want to help now." The next few weeks moved quickly. The committee began drafting a proposal, revised inclusion language in the student handbook, anonymous reporting systems for racial harassment, optional cultural electives. It was ambitious, messy, and no one expected it to go far. But Malik knew better. He brought in research from neighboring schools. He met with teachers after hours. He even convinced the janitorial staff, his father's friends, to sign a letter of support. Still, not everyone was thrilled. One afternoon, as he opened his locker, he found another note. This one was not kind. "You'll never be one of us. Keep pretending." He held it for a moment, then, without emotion, crumpled it and threw it away. That night, Joseph found him asleep at the table, a stack of proposals beneath his cheek. He placed a blanket over his son's shoulders and didn't say a word. The day the committee presented their proposal to the board, Malik wore his pressed navy shirt again. His father sat in the audience in uniform next to Ellie's mother. Mrs. Rivera introduced them. Simone led the presentation. And when it was Malik's turn, he walked to the podium with calm clarity. "We aren't asking to change the history of this school," he said. "We're asking to make room for more stories." There were murmurs in the crowd. A few skeptical stares. Hargrave didn't blink. "But if Whitstone teaches honor," Malik continued, "then honor must include truth. And truth is, we haven't been listening." His voice didn't waver. "We are here. We've always been here. It's time the walls reflected that." When he stepped down, the silence was thick, but it was a different kind of silence now, the kind that comes right before something begins. Thanksgiving break arrived, and with it, a brief pause from the heavy stares and colder shoulders. Malik spent the holiday in their small kitchen, helping Joseph stir cranberry sauce and fried chicken instead of turkey. It was just the two of them seated at a second-hand table with mismatched chairs, the news playing low on a dusty television in the corner. They didn't speak much about school. Joseph knew better than to press, but as they ate, he reached across the table, squeezed Malik's hand, and said simply, "Proud of you. No matter what they say." Malik smiled. It was enough. When classes resumed, the weather turned bitter. Frost rimmed the windows of Whitstone Academy, and students hurried from building to building in coats too expensive for the cold to matter. Malik returned to his routines with quiet precision: committee meetings, tutoring, essays. He no longer looked for approval. He had stopped waiting for someone to open doors. He was too busy building his own. But it didn't go unnoticed. On the second Wednesday of December, a letter arrived in his locker, tucked neatly in an envelope addressed in bold, slanted handwriting. He opened it carefully. "Mr. Johnson, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to receive the inaugural Whitstone Civic Voice Award in recognition of your leadership, courage, and commitment to educational progress." Below that, typed in smaller letters, "You are invited to attend the Honors Assembly on the 18th of December, where you will be formally recognized." Malik stared at it, reading it twice. Then again. An award, not from the students, not from a rogue teacher, but from the school itself. The same school that 3 months earlier had nearly turned him away at the gates. He didn't cry, but he did sit for a moment, just breathing. Later in the courtyard, Ellie grinned when she saw the envelope. "I heard already," she said. "The teachers are buzzing." "I didn't expect this," Malik said quietly. "Maybe you didn't need to," Ellie replied. "Maybe they finally had no choice." But good news at Whitstone was never left untouched. That week, a post began circulating online. An anonymous blog accusing Malik of being given special treatment, claiming his father's job had earned him sympathy points, and that the award was a ploy to appease modern politics. It spread fast, too fast. Screenshots made their way into classrooms. Students whispered again, only this time more viciously. "He's just lucky. Everything's about race now." He guilt-tripped the board. Malik saw the comments. He read every one of them. Not because he wanted to, but because he needed to know the shadows that still followed him. In class, he said less. His essays became sharper, more exact. His posture never slouched, but his eyes were tired. At lunch, even Ellie hesitated. "Do you want to say something? A post? A response?" Malik shook his head. "If they've already decided what I am, no amount of explaining will change that." "But it's not fair." "No," Malik said, "but it's real." Friday came. The whispers hadn't died down. If anything, they thickened like fog that refused to lift. That afternoon, he walked past the administration office and saw Mrs. Rivera in a tense conversation with Hargrave. He stopped, unpaused, then turned, knocked once, and entered. Both administrators looked up. "I assume you've seen the blog," Malik said calmly. Hargrave straightened his tie. "It's under review." Mrs. Rivera said more gently, "It's deeply inappropriate. We're working on tracing the source." "I don't want it taken down," Malik said. "I want it addressed." Hargrave frowned. "In what sense?" "Let the board make a statement, not just about me, but about the climate here, about the bullying, the silence." "That's a slippery slope, Mr. Johnson." "No," he replied. "It's a clear one. Either you stand for something, or you don't." Mrs. Rivera met his eyes and gave the faintest nod. "Let me speak with the others." Malik left the office knowing he had pushed a line, but it was the same line that had always existed, just more visible now. The following Monday, a printed bulletin was distributed in homerooms. Simple, direct, the Whitstone Board of Trustees unequivocally condemns personal attacks against any student based on background, family status, or race. Discourse is welcome. Harassment is not. All students deserve safety and respect. It wasn't perfect. It didn't name him directly, but it was a start. At the Honors Assembly, Malik sat in the front row, wearing his pressed navy blue shirt. Joseph sat behind him, dressed in his best jacket and freshly shined shoes. His name wasn't printed in the program, but Malik had made sure there was a seat for him. When his name was called, the applause was louder than he expected. Some clapped out of politeness, some because they meant it, but all clapped. He walked across the stage, without trembling. Principal Hargrave handed him the plaque. "Congratulations, Mr. Johnson." Malik looked him in the eye. "Thank you," he said, "for following through." Hargrave nodded once, tight-lipped, but it was enough. Malik stood at the podium for a brief moment, not to speak, just to receive. He scanned the room. There were faces still blank, still unsure, still hesitant. But there were others now, faces he had never spoken to, nodding, watching, open. As he stepped down from a stage, plaque in hand, Ellie whispered, "How does it feel?" Malik smiled. "Small but real, like an echo," he said. "An echo?" "Yeah," Malik whispered back. "Because it's finally starting to bounce back." The new year at Whitstone Academy began not with celebration, but with unease. January's cold settled in like a warning. Snow powdered the wrought iron gates. Radiators clanked in protest against the chill. Students returned from break in thick coats and quieter spirits. But for Malik, the air wasn't cold enough to quiet what had begun. In the weeks following the assembly, changes started to ripple beneath the surface. Some were subtle, a smile from a teacher who once barely acknowledged him, a student nodding in the hall instead of looking away. Others were more concrete. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee, once a mere footnote, was now listed on the official school bulletin board. Its proposals, once ignored, were now being reviewed by department heads. Malik kept his head down, but his eyes open. Still, resistance didn't fade. It adapted. It came in new forms. Delays in approvals. Sudden schedule changes that interfered with committee meetings. Forms misplaced. When the proposal for an optional African American history elective was brought forward, it was returned without comment twice. One afternoon, Ellie burst into the library, face flushed. "You need to see this." Malik followed her into an empty classroom. On her phone screen, a leaked staff chat thread was spreading online, screenshots, sarcastic comments from teachers. Some laughed about social justice babysitting. Others mocked the plaque prints. One comment read, "Maybe the janitor's kid should focus on mopping, not mentoring." Malik read it in silence. "They're scared," Ellie said. "That's all this is." Malik turned the phone off. "Then they should be." That evening, he said little at dinner. Joseph noticed. "You all right, son?" "They're not just students this time. It's staff." Joseph set down his fork. "They're teachers. Doesn't make them right. They're trying to make me small again." Joseph reached over, placing his hand gently over Malik's. "Let them try." Malik met his eyes. "You know what small people hate most?" Joseph asked. "What?" "When the thing they tried to bury grows taller than they ever imagined." The next morning, Malik went straight to Mrs. Rivera's office. He placed the printed screenshots on her desk. Rivera read them carefully, her face darkening. "I assume you know this isn't official school communication," she said. "But they're teachers." "I know, and I'll bring it to the board." Malik hesitated. "What will they do?" Rivera sighed. "They'll discuss. They'll form a subcommittee. Maybe issue a statement." "That's not enough." "Then what do you want?" "I want the students to know the truth," Malik said. "Not the gossip. Not the slander. The truth." Rivera studied him for a long time. "Are you prepared for what might come of that?" "I've already lived it." Later that week, Malik requested an assembly, not as an honoree, but as a speaker. He didn't ask for permission. He submitted a petition signed by over 100 students. Rivera approved it. Hargrave did not. But by then, it didn't matter. The auditorium was half full when Malik took the stage. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to support. Some came to see him fail. He stood at the podium with a single sheet of paper. "Whitstone teaches us to value honor, discipline, and truth," he began. "But those values mean nothing if we only protect them when it's convenient." He paused, letting his eyes sweep across the room. "In the past month, I've been praised publicly and mocked privately. I've been awarded and attacked. And I've realized something important. What scares people most is not the noise, it's the clarity." He held up the printouts of the leaked messages. "These are not rumors. These are the words of the people who are meant to teach us. And I am not here to punish them. I am here to remind us that silence is not safety, it is complicity." Someone coughed in the audience. Another leaned forward. "When we choose to ignore prejudice, we become its echo. And Whitstone deserves better than that. We all do." The silence afterward wasn't heavy, it was charged. He stepped off stage and didn't look back. The fallout came fast. That evening, the screenshots hit the local news. One teacher quietly resigned. Another issued a public apology. A third was placed on leave. Hargrave, under pressure, released a formal statement condemning divisive rhetoric among staff. For the first time in the school's modern history, Whitstone was being forced to look in the mirror. But it wasn't revenge Malik felt. It was justice, clear and cold and necessary. That night, he sat with Joseph in the living room. They watched the news coverage, his face blurred, his name mentioned with cautious respect. "You've shaken the tree," Joseph said. Malik nodded. "Let's hope something good falls from it." Outside, snow fell silently across the school's roof. Inside, a boy who had once been told he didn't belong had now become its conscience, and the echo of his voice was still ringing. February arrived with a brittle sun and a wind that never quite left the bones. Whitstone Academy stood unchanged in its grand architecture, pillars and marble, polished floors, and echoes of old money. But something beneath its surface had shifted. The faculty lounge was quieter now. The students whispered less, or at least whispered differently. Some whispers carried curiosity, others respect. And though the halls still bore traces of cold glances and closed doors, Malik could feel it. The weight of his presence had grown. He was no longer just visible. He was undeniable. But there was one space that hadn't changed. The Portrait Hall. It was an ornate corridor that led to the main library, lined with towering oil paintings of Whitstone's founders, major donors, and former headmasters. All white, all men, all stern. Students were taught to walk through it with reverence. No loitering, no laughter, no questioning. Malik had avoided it for months. One morning, as snow gathered lightly outside the windows, he stopped at the entrance. Ellie stood beside him, sipping tea from a thermos. "You never go in here," Ellie said. "Because it doesn't see me," Malik replied. "But you see it." Malik nodded slowly, then stepped inside. Each portrait stared down with cold eyes heavy in their frames. Each plaque bore a date, a title, a legacy. But nowhere in this hall was there any sign of the students who scrubbed its floors, the staff who opened its doors, or the children who dared to dream beyond its walls, and certainly not the son of a janitor who spoke 7 languages. He stopped in front of the oldest painting, George Whitstone himself, founder of the Academy, frozen in oil and arrogance. "I wonder," Malik murmured, "how many voices had to be silenced so he could hang here undisturbed." Ellie didn't reply. She didn't need to. That afternoon in committee, Malik raised a new motion to create a new wing of the Portrait Hall, one dedicated to unsung heroes of Whitstone's history. Not just headmasters, but maintenance workers, cafeteria staff, students who had broken barriers. A new kind of legacy, he said, one that doesn't need a trust fund to be remembered. The vote was split. Simone supported him. Ellie, of course, but few others hesitated. "Isn't that symbolic?" asked one. "It won't fix policies or funding." "No," Malik replied, "but symbols matter. So do walls. What we choose to hang on them matters." The proposal moved forward barely, but when it reached the administration, the resistance was immediate. Miss Whitaker pulled him aside. "You're pushing too hard." "I'm pushing just enough," Malik said. "People are already watching you closely." "Then let them see everything." Word of the proposal spread. Some students mocked it, calling it the janitor's hall. Others said it was performative, but Malik ignored the noise. He drafted names, wrote biographies, collected photos. He spent weekends interviewing long-retired staff, transcribing their memories by hand. And then came the breakthrough. One evening, Mr. Tompkins, an elderly groundskeeper who had worked at Whitstone for over 40 years, handed him an old box. "This was your mother's," he said quietly. Malik blinked. "You knew her. She worked here a long time ago. Helped organize the first library catalog system. Never got credit." Malik's throat tightened. "No one ever told me." Because no one ever asked. That night, Malik sat cross-legged on his bed, thumbing through his mother's journal, pages filled with neat handwriting, lists of book titles, observations about students, fragments of poetry. One line stood out. "I may not have a plaque on the wall, but I know where every book lives." That's enough. It wasn't. Not anymore. The next week, Malik added his mother's name to the list for the new wing, and with it, a scanned photo of her at a dusty desk surrounded by books. At the next committee meeting, Malik presented it all, names, stories, photos, even a sample design for the wall. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Simone said, "Let's make it real." Mrs. Rivera approved the proposal. Hargrave did not comment, but again, it didn't matter. Students began signing a new petition, not just black students, but others, children of cafeteria workers, immigrant students, anyone who had ever felt invisible. A week later, the board approved the motion unanimously. And so, for the first time in its long history, Whitstone Academy began construction on a new section of the Portrait Hall. A small plaque was the first to go up. It read, "This wall is for those who walked unseen." May their footsteps echo louder than silence. Malik stood in front of it one afternoon, his father beside him. Joseph wore his uniform. Malik wore his confidence. She would have loved this, Joseph said, voice thick. I hope she hears it, Malik replied. She does. Students passed by slower than usual, eyes drawn to the new plaque. No one mocked it, not this time. Malik watched them go. He hadn't come to Whitstone to be remembered, but now his mother would be, and that, he realized, was the most powerful echo of all. The morning air in late February held the sharpness of thawing ice, brittle and impatient. Malik walked through the gates of Whitstone Academy with his scarf pulled high, his notebook tucked under one arm. His steps, once careful, now carried a quiet certainty. The portrait hall had begun to change, one plaque, one story at a time, but change outside those walls was slower, more resistant. That week, a reporter from the Charleston Herald requested an interview. Malik was hesitant. He had grown weary of how words could be twisted, how stories could be edited until their meanings served someone else's comfort. But this reporter, a young black woman named Camille Price, had written thoughtfully about racial justice in education. She had followed Malik's journey since the assembly, and she had waited. I don't want a headline, Camille said in her email. I want the truth from your voice. As it happened, Malik agreed. The interview was set to take place in the old school library, beneath the high stained glass windows that filtered in slants of winter sun. Camille arrived with a worn leather satchel and eyes that understood more than they said. She didn't ask for a stage photo. She didn't demand drama. She simply turned on her recorder, nodded, and said, whenever you're ready. Malik spoke slowly at first, recounting his early days at Whitstone. The day he first stood in the office, dismissed before he could speak, the smell of floor wax on his father's uniform, the speech, the backlash, the portrait hall, his mother's journal. Camille listened. No interruptions, just presence. Then came the question that made Malik pause. Was there ever a moment, Camille asked gently, when you wanted to leave? Malik's fingers curled around the edge of his notebook. Yes, he said, more than once. And why didn't you? Malik exhaled. Because if I left, nothing would change. And someone else, someone like me, would be told the same lies, that they don't belong, that their story doesn't matter. I stayed because silence felt more dangerous than conflict. Camille leaned forward. Do you think it's working? I think people are listening now. Even if they don't agree. Even if it's uncomfortable. That's a start. The interview lasted an hour. When it ended, Camille shook his hand, thanked him sincerely, and promised, I'll make sure your words stay yours. The story ran the following Sunday. It was titled, The Boy Who Made Whitstone Listen. It didn't sensationalize. It honored the truth. It quoted him fully. It included a photo, not of Malik on a stage, but one of him seated beside his father at the unveiling of the new wall. Both of them laughing, eyes bright. The response was swift. Messages poured into the school inbox. Some angry, some deeply moved. One came from a woman who had graduated in 1972, the first black student ever admitted to Whitstone. I never thought I'd see this day, the message read. You didn't just open the door, you held it open. But the attention brought new tension. That week, Principal Hargrave called Malik in again. He walked into the office with his shoulders back, his face unreadable. I assume you've seen the article, Hargrave said. I have, Malik replied. While I appreciate your commitment to discourse, I do worry that the school's reputation is finally becoming honest, Malik finished, raising an eyebrow. Hargrave's mouth pressed into a line. There are parents threatening to pull donations. Some board members feel this has gone too far. And what do you feel? Malik asked steadily. He looked at Malik for a long moment. I feel, he said carefully, that you are not easily intimidated. That's correct. Hargrave folded his hands. If you want to continue here, you need to understand the limits of influence. Malik leaned forward. Respectfully, sir, if you think this is the end of my influence, then you haven't been listening. He blinked just once. Malik stood, gathering his notebook. I won't stop speaking, but I'll keep doing it the way I've always done it, truthfully, calmly, with purpose. You can either support that or be remembered for resisting it. He left without waiting for dismissal. Later that day, Mrs. Rivera found him in the courtyard. You shook him, she said. Malik smirked faintly. Good. Rivera hesitated. You know, when I first started here, I used to eat lunch alone because I was the only Latina in admin. They made me feel like a guest. Malik's face softened. You've changed more than this school's policies, Rivera continued. You've changed its memory. That matters. Malik nodded, the words soaking in. That evening, back home, Joseph grilled sandwiches while humming to a Marvin Gaye record. Malik sat at the kitchen table, rereading a letter he had received that day, a handwritten note from a teacher in another state, asking to use his story in a lesson plan on courage. His story, once something invisible, dismissed. Now something being taught. He folded the letter slowly, holding it like it was more than paper. "Dad," he said softly, "what if this keeps going?" Joseph looked up. "Then keep going with it." "But what if it gets harder?" He walked over, placed a sandwich on Malik's plate, and said, "Then, it's probably worth doing." Malik smiled. The world hadn't changed overnight, but one boy had stepped into a place where he was never supposed to speak, and made it listen. And now it was beginning to remember his name. March blew in with heavy winds and gray skies. Whitstone Academy, in its stony pride, remained tall and proud. Yet inside its walls, a new tension quietly brewed. As Malik walked through the halls, he felt the air buzz with conversations not spoken aloud. Not yet, but something was coming. It started as a rumor, half-whispered between lockers, scribbled on bathroom mirrors in faint dry erase marker. Lock-in protest. Midnight. Main hall. Students only. Malik found message one Friday afternoon, hidden behind a book on a shelf in the library. He took it to Ellie. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked. Ellie scanned the note and nodded slowly. "Yeah, some students from the junior class are organizing it. They're frustrated, say Whitstone's changes are cosmetic, that the administration is stalling every proposal." "They're not wrong," Malik said, sitting beside her. "But a lock-in, that's risky. Hargrave will lose his mind." "That's the point," Ellie whispered. Malik thought about it that night. At dinner, Joseph talked about a busted boiler in the East Wing and how nobody seemed to care until it flooded an entire hallway. She stirred her soup absent-mindedly. "It's always that way," Joseph said. "No one listens till the ceiling caves in." Malik looked up. What if the students pushed too hard? Then maybe it's time they did. He didn't sleep well. By Saturday, word had spread. The lock-in was set for Sunday night, quietly organized, coordinated through texts and coded social media stories. No faculty had acknowledged it yet, but Malik knew it was coming to a head. He had a choice: join or stand back. On Sunday afternoon, Malik stood before the committee during an emergency meeting in the art room. "I'm not asking for us to lead this," he said, "but if we ignore it, we lose credibility." Simone frowned. "It's not sanctioned. They could suspend people." "Or worse," added another student. "What if they call parents or police?" Malik stayed quiet for a beat. Then he said, when Rosa Parks sat down, it wasn't sanctioned either. The room went still. Simone spoke again. "If we go prepared, peaceful, clear demands, no destruction, no threats." Malik nodded. "Agreed." That night, at 11:52 p.m., nearly 50 students gathered in the main hall. They brought sleeping bags, candles in jars, clipboards, and posters rolled under their arms. Malik arrived just as the clock struck midnight, his face calm, his voice steady. Posters were taped to pillars. "We deserve more than silence." Real change, not PR. History has eyes. They sat cross-legged on the cold marble floor. Phones recorded quiet speeches. Some students recited poetry. Others shared stories, personal accounts of being ignored, harassed, overlooked. One girl wept as she told how no one had helped her after a teacher made a racial joke in class. Malik stood finally, his voice soft but piercing. "This school taught us how to speak with grace, but not how to be heard with truth. Tonight we're doing both." At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered. Then came the echoing footsteps. Hargrave entered, flanked by 2 security officers and Mrs. Rivera, her face unreadable. The room held its breath. "Everyone up," Hargrave commanded. "This is not authorized. You're trespassing. Go back to your dorms now." No one moved. Malik stepped forward. "We're not breaking anything. We're not shouting. We're staying until our demands are heard." Hargrave's eyes narrowed. "This will have consequences." Malik lifted a piece of paper. "These are our demands: a fixed timeline for the inclusion curriculum, transparent records of disciplinary actions related to harassment, monthly student forums with admin presence. These aren't radical. They're overdue." Rivera took the paper silently. Hargrave looked at the crowd. "You think this is how change works? You think you'll shame this institution into bending?" Malik's chin lifted. "We're not trying to shame it. We're trying to save it." A long pause. Then Rivera spoke quietly but firmly. Let them finish the night safely. I'll stay here. Hargrave's face turned to stone. This is your call, then? No, Rivera replied. This is theirs. He left without another word. By dawn, the hall was filled with soft snores and candlelight shadows. Students had drifted off to sleep on blankets and books. Malik sat beside Ellie, still awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling. You think they'll listen now? Ellie whispered. They already did, Malik said. That's why he was angry. On Monday morning, news of the lock-in spread like fire. Photos flooded social media. Hashtags trended. Former students weighed in. Local reporters appeared by noon. By Tuesday, the school board announced a public meeting to address student concerns. Malik was asked to speak. He did, calmly, clearly, without apology. Hargrave did not attend, but Rivera did. So did 3 new faculty members who had remained silent for too long. This time, they voiced support. A week later, Malik returned to the portrait hall. The new section was nearly complete. 8 new plaques, 3 framed photographs, and space left intentionally blank with a plaque that read, "For the voices yet to come." He stared at it. A seat saved. A promise made. A future forming. Not in silence, not in fear, but in the sound of young voices echoing through the oldest walls. By the time spring warmed the steps of Whitstone Academy, tulips were blooming and neat rows lined the edges of the courtyard. The sting of winter had finally receded, but in its place lingered something new, awareness. Teachers hesitated before dismissing difficult topics. Students spoke with more caution, more curiosity. The silence that had once ruled the school had been cracked, and through that crack, light began to pour. Malik found himself increasingly pulled into the gravity of change. He'd become more than a student now, a symbol, a voice, even when he didn't want to be. But he stayed grounded. He walked the same halls, sat at the same worn desk in a library, and returned each evening to the same modest home where his father's work boots still sat by the door. One Thursday morning, Mrs. Rivera intercepted him just outside the language lab. Her face was unreadable. "I need a minute," she said, guiding Malik toward her office. Inside, she handed him a cream-colored envelope sealed with a wax stamp. "What is this?" Malik asked. Rivera smiled. "Open it." Malik slipped a finger under the flap and pulled out a letter. His eyes scanned the heading, United States Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights and Inclusion. He froze. The letter continued, "Dear Mr. Malik Johnson, we have followed your courageous efforts and leadership at Whitestone Academy. Your work has not gone unnoticed. In honor of your advocacy for equity in education, we would like to invite you to Washington, D.C. to speak at our annual Youth Inclusion Summit next month. We believe your story and your voice can inspire meaningful national dialogue." Malik's breath caught. "Washington," he whispered. Mrs. Rivera nodded. "They want you to speak to students, educators, leaders from across the country. You'll have 15 minutes. Malik sat down slowly, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. "They said I didn't belong here," he murmured. "And now you're being asked to represent the future of education," Rivera said warmly. Malik blinked, stunned silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I don't even know what to wear." Rivera laughed softly. "We'll figure it out." Word spread fast. Ellie practically burst with pride. Simone and the committee helped Malik prepare, gathering quotes, framing anecdotes, brainstorming structure. Joseph, however, was uncharacteristically quiet. The night before the trip, Malik found him sitting on the porch, staring at the stars with a quiet expression. "You all right, Dad?" He nodded slowly. I keep thinking about your mother." Malik sat beside him. "I wish she could see this." "She does," Joseph said without hesitation. "Every time you speak, son, I swear I hear her voice in you." Malik rested his head back against the porch rail. "I never wanted any of this," he said softly. "I know," Joseph whispered. "But now that it's here, you carry it well. Just remember, when you speak, you don't have to be anyone else. You've already done the hard part. Now just tell the truth." 2 days later, Malik stood behind the podium in a grand hall in Washington, facing a room filled with rows of educators, policymakers, and students from across the country. Cameras streamed the event live. His name appeared on a banner overhead. He wore a navy suit, not flashy but sharp. His hair was neat, his posture steady. He gripped the edges of the podium with calm hands. When he spoke, his voice didn't shake. "I come from a place where words were often not enough, where being smart wasn't always safe. where speaking multiple languages didn't protect me from being called too poor, too black, or too much. But I learned something at Whitestone Academy. Silence is not neutrality, and visibility is not power unless we use it. He paused, letting the words settle. When I arrived at Whitestone, I was nearly turned away at the door. Not because of my grades, not because of my effort, but because someone looked at me and assumed I didn't belong. And yet here I am, not because I demanded space, but because I built it. He looked up, locking eyes with the room. This isn't just about me. It's about every student who's been told to wait their turn, to speak softly, to be grateful for the scraps of respect handed to them. We deserve more than tolerance. We deserve belief. Applause followed, loud, sustained, real. Afterward, officials approached him with compliments and reporters with questions. He answered each one with humility and purpose, always circling back to his message. Justice is not a destination. It's a habit, a practice, a decision made every day. When he returned home, Joseph met him at the bus stop, arms wide, eyes glassy. They stood, Malik told him. Joseph nodded. I knew they would. Back at Whitestone, a framed photo of Malik at the summit appeared in the main office. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, Malik Johnson, Student Speaker Catalyst. Some students stared at it in silence. Others smiled. But no one ignored it, because Malik's voice had left the room and entered history. April carried with it the smell of fresh grass and possibility. The cherry blossoms lining the main quad at Whitestone burst into delicate clouds of pink and white, and students lingered beneath them during lunch breaks, exchanging laughter and glances beneath their petals. But Malik was restless. Since his return from Washington, he'd felt a shift, not in the students or teachers, but in the institution itself. The building seemed to hold its breath around him now. He could sense it in the way the board meetings paused when he entered, in the whispers behind doors that hushed when he passed. And then it came, an email, short and clinical, from Mrs. Rivera. Subject, urgent board vote Malik. There will be a closed-door board vote this Friday regarding changes to the Portrait Hall legacy wall. Several board members are attempting to halt further expansion. It appears your recent visibility has triggered concerns about redefining tradition. I wanted you to know. Rivera. Malik stared at the screen, heart thudding. He had known there would be pushback, there always was. But he hadn't expected it to come in the form of erasure. The wall wasn't just brick and names. It was memory, reclaimed space, proof of belonging. And now they wanted to stop it, not just pause it. Stop it. He forwarded the email to Ellie, Simone, and the committee. Within an hour, they were huddled in the student center, voices tense, but focused. We can't let them shut it down, Simone said, slapping the table. They'll say it's about tradition, Ellie added. That's not personal. But it is, Malik said. It's always personal when silence wins. They drafted a response, an open letter. They gathered signatures from students, alumni, even faculty who had once stayed silent. They planned to sit in at the board office, peaceful, visible, honest. Malik also wrote a private letter to each board member individually. He told them about his mother's journal, about the janitor who kept the school safe at night, about how seeing someone like you on a wall changes what you think is possible. On Friday, the vote took place behind closed doors. Students sat outside the boardroom, lined up along the marble hallway like sentinels. Some read books. Others just stared ahead, hands folded in quiet defiance. Malik sat cross-legged, his back against the cold wall, eyes closed. He didn't pray for a miracle. He prayed for courage. An hour passed. Then two. Finally, the door creaked open. Mrs. Rivera stepped out, clipboard in hand, her face unreadable. Everyone stood. She looked at Malik and gave a single nod. It passed, she said softly. The expansion will continue. The vote was 6-3 in favor. Cheers erupted. Students hugged. Ellie cried. Simone punched the air. But Malik just stood still, blinking. It passed, he repeated, more to himself than anyone else. The board had listened. Later, Mrs. Rivera pulled him aside. One of the board members told me something after the vote, she said. She said your letter reminded her of her grandmother, who cleaned classrooms for decades and never had her name on anything. Malik swallowed hard. Your truth, Rivera added, did what shouting never could. That night at home, Joseph pulled a dusty photo album from the top shelf of the closet. They sat on the floor flipping through old photos of his mother sorting books, of a young Joseph sweeping snow off the school steps. She always wanted you to know your worth, Joseph said, even when others tried to define it for you. Malik turned the page. It was a photo he'd never seen before, his mother standing beside a tiny Malik in pigtails, both smiling in front of the old school gates. "She used to whisper to me," Malik said. "One day they'll know your name." Joseph put an arm around his shoulders. "They do now," he whispered. But Malik wasn't done. The next morning, he drafted another proposal to create a new leadership scholarship in his mother's name, awarded each year to a student from a working-class family who demonstrated courage and service. He called it the Quiet Strength Award. And this time, when he presented it, no one tried to stop him, because Malik had changed the rules not by burning the system down, but by refusing to be erased from its story. And the institution, brick by stubborn brick, had begun to learn how to listen. By late April, with the final term approaching, Whitestone Academy had begun to glow in spring's full embrace. The ivy thickened on the stone walls. The lawns were a deep, lush green, and for the first time in years, the air on campus felt alive with more than just prestige. It felt alive with purpose. Malik walked those grounds with a quiet pride, aware that every step he took now echoed with something larger than himself. But change, even when it blooms, carries shadows. It began with a whisper. A custodian named Mr. Dorsey, a quiet man in his 60s who had worked at Whitestone for nearly 40 years, caught Malik in the hallway one evening as he stayed late preparing scholarship documents. "Mr. Johnson," he said, his eyes darting around. "You got a minute?" Malik nodded, sensing the weight in his voice. He led him to the West Wing, a seldom-used part of the school where the original structure remained largely untouched. The floorboards creaked, the lights flickered, and the air carried the scent of dust and old wood. "Right here," he said, stopping in front of a locked storage door. "This used to be part of the servants' quarters. Most folks don't know about it. Wasn't even in the building maps they gave us years back." Malik frowned. "What's in there?" He handed him an old iron key. "Go look. It's time someone saw it." Malik hesitated, then slid the key into the lock. It turned with a loud click, and the door groaned open. Inside was darkness. But as Malik flicked on his phone flashlight, the beam revealed a small room lined with wooden shelves, dust-covered ledgers, and boxes stacked high. At the far end stood an old filing cabinet, rusted but intact. "What is all this?" Malik whispered. Mr. Dorsey stepped inside, pulled out one of the boxes, and opened it. Inside were notebooks, faded photos, letters, all labeled with names Malik didn't recognize. "These," he said, "are records of the black staff who worked here during the segregation years. Groundskeepers, kitchen staff, nannies. None of them ever made it into the official archives." Malik's heart caught. "They kept their own records," Dorsey continued. "Wrote down what they saw, who they helped, what they were denied. Some of it's hard to read, but it's truth." Malik knelt and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. The first page read, "May 1948, James Alton, grounds crew. Paid $0, 42/hour. Denied access to staff lounge. Page after page, name after name, voice after voice. They were buried," Malik said, his voice cracking. Mr. Dorsey nodded. "That's what history does when no one's watching." Malik stood slowly, the notebook pressed to his chest. "This can't stay hidden." He smiled faintly. "Didn't think you'd say anything else." Over the next few days, Malik and Ellie cataloged the materials. Simone helped with digitizing. The committee pored over the files late into the evenings. Each discovery made the school's pristine facade feel more fragile, more human. There were love letters written between staff who weren't allowed to marry on campus grounds. A stack of complaint letters, never answered. A drawing made by a janitor's son who dreamed of attending Whitestone, drawings that looked eerily like the current layout of the portrait hall. Malik proposed a new project, an exhibit titled Beneath the Floorboards. He pitched it to the administration as a historical installation, a way to honor the unseen legacy of the workers who built and sustained Whitestone for decades without recognition. Hargrave was silent during the presentation. When Malik finished, he leaned back, steepling his fingers. "You're proposing we reveal the school knowingly suppressed these records." "I'm proposing we tell the truth," Malik replied. He was quiet for a long moment. "Then I won't stop it, but I won't endorse it either." "That's enough," Malik said. "We don't need permission to remember." With Rivera's help and a grant submitted through alumni funds, the exhibit was approved for the East Gallery, ironically, near the headmaster's wing. The launch was planned for late May. Flyers went up. Media inquiries began trickling in. Students prepared readings. Malik curated a timeline wall, ending with his mother's journal entry beside a plaque reading, "What we don't see, we still feel." On the day of the unveiling, the room was packed, students, teachers, former staff, and even some board members. Joseph stood near the back, eyes glossy with pride. Malik stood before them all, notebook in hand. "I found these stories under dust and silence," he said, "but they were never truly gone. They waited for someone to listen, for someone to care. Today we remember not just what was hidden, but who we choose to be because of it." He opened the notebook and read aloud, April 3rd, 1950, Agnes Cooper, housekeeper. "They say I can't eat at the same table, but I know this school better than they ever will. One day someone will say my name out loud." Malik looked up. "Agnes, we're saying it now." The room erupted into applause. Not loud, but full. Deep. The kind of sound that says, "We see you now." Later, as the crowd thinned, Hargrave approached quietly. "I underestimated you," he said. Malik looked at him, steady. "You underestimated the power of truth." Hargrave gave a slow nod, then walked away. That night, Malik sat alone in the gallery, staring at the timeline wall. He traced each photo, each name, each note. He wasn't just preserving history, he was rewriting its ending. And for the first time, Whitestone wasn't resisting. It was learning. June arrived with golden mornings and the promise of endings. Whitestone Academy began to wrap itself in the rituals of year's end, final exams, graduation rehearsals, and the quiet panic of packing dorms. The portrait hall had grown. Beneath the floorboards had become a mandatory stop on school tours. Change no longer whispered, it had found a voice. Yet Malik kept his focus on finishing strong, quietly dodging attention, content to have done what was necessary. But the world had other plans. It was the morning of the annual Whitestone Honors Assembly, a tradition older than most of the staff. Students gathered in the grand auditorium, polished and prim. Banners lined the walls, gold and white. Parents filled the back rows, murmuring in anticipation. Malik sat with Ellie and Simone near the front, mostly out of obligation. He had no expectation of recognition. That had never been his goal. The Headmaster's Award was the final and most prestigious honor, typically given to a student who exemplified leadership, service, and the Whitestone spirit. In years past, it had gone to student body presidents, legacy scholars, and children donors. Malik had assumed this year would be no different. As Principal Hargrave took the stage, the lights dimmed slightly, and the murmuring quieted to a hush. Hargrave's voice, clear but restrained, echoed through the room. Each year, we reserve the final moment of this assembly to recognize one student whose contributions reach beyond academic performance. This student, through their actions, not only reflects our values but challenges us to expand them. Malik shifted slightly in his seat. Hargrave continued. This year, the faculty committee received nominations from across departments, but there was one name that repeated again and again. From teachers, from students, from alumni who never met him, but felt his voice. The screen behind him lit up with a single photograph, Malik standing in front of the Beneath the Floorboards exhibit, holding an open notebook. A quiet gasp moved through the crowd. Malik's hands froze in his lap. "Malik Johnson," Hargrave said, "please join me on stage." For a split second, he didn't move. Then, pushed gently by Ellie's hand and Simone's whispered go, he rose. The auditorium swelled with applause, not polite, not obligatory, genuine. Malik walked slowly to the stage. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with the weight of the moment. Hargrave held the microphone in one hand and a small plaque in the other. "In my time as principal, I've rarely witnessed such a transformation, not just in a student, but in a school. Mr. Johnson's advocacy has challenged us, pushed us, reminded us that tradition is only honorable when it evolves." He handed Malik the plaque. The engraved words made him blink twice. Malik Johnson, 2025 Headmaster's Award for Courage, Truth, and Legacy. Malik stepped to the mic. He looked out at the sea of faces, some smiling, some surprised, a few tearful. "I wasn't supposed to be here," he began, voice calm. "Not just on this stage, but in this building. Some of you remember the day. I was almost turned away. I do. I remember every word." A hush fell deeper. "But I also remember what happened after. I remember those who listened, those who stood beside me, and those who changed even when it was hard." He paused. "This award isn't just about me. It's about everyone who was told they didn't belong and showed up anyway. It's about telling the truth, even when your voice shakes. It's about remembering the names that history forgot and making sure no one else gets erased. His eyes met Hargrave's for a brief, loaded second. This school is not perfect, he said, voice firm. But it's learning, and that matters. When he stepped down, the applause didn't stop for a full minute. Later, Joseph met him outside, leaning against his old truck with a bouquet of sunflowers. You, he said, pulling Malik into a hug, just rewrote the ending of a very old story. Malik smiled, burying his face in his father's shoulder. I didn't expect it. That's what makes it matter, Joseph whispered. That evening, the award sat on the kitchen table. Malik stared at it, then flipped it over. Taped to the back was a note, handwritten and unsigned. Justice doesn't knock. It waits. And you open the door. Thank you. Malik folded the note gently, placing it in his notebook beside his mother's old journal. He glanced out the window at the darkening sky, where the first stars blinked into view. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, the world wasn't pretending it didn't exist. And that, he thought, was enough for now. The week after the awards ceremony felt like a strange dream. There were no more late-night committee meetings, no urgent proposals, no whispered strategies behind library shelves. Whitestone's spring term wound down like a symphony drawing to a close. Teachers offered quiet congratulations. Students approached Malik in the halls, not with awe, but with respect. Even the ones who had once avoided him now nodded in silent acknowledgement. It felt good, but also felt unfinished. One afternoon, Malik sat beneath the old maple tree in the south courtyard, the same tree he'd cried under on his first day when he thought they wouldn't let him in. Now he returned to it, not in fear, but to think, to feel. Simone dropped down beside him, offering a lemonade from the vending machine. You haven't said much since the award, Simone noted. I'm not sure what to say, Malik replied. You won. It wasn't a competition. Simone laughed gently. You know what I mean. You changed things. Malik took a sip and stared across the courtyard. I did, but change is quiet now. And I think that scares me more than when it was loud. Simone tilted her head. Why? Because silence can mean two things, progress or retreat. Simone didn't respond right away. Then she said, well, you're not the only one who notices. People are still watching. That evening, Malik returned to the East Gallery to check on the Beneath the Floorboards exhibit. He hadn't been there in a few days. Inside, the lights were dim, and the room was empty, except for one figure standing near the far wall. Mrs. Hargrave. Malik froze. He hadn't seen the headmaster's wife since the portrait wall controversy. She had always stayed in the background, present at events, polite in conversation, but never involved in the politics of the school. Now she stood with her arms crossed, gazing at the timeline. Malik approached cautiously. Mrs. Hargrave. The woman turned, her face unreadable. I didn't mean to intrude, Malik said. You're not intruding, she replied, her voice quiet but sharp. I came here tonight because I wanted to see what my husband has refused to look at. Malik stayed silent. Mrs. Hargrave pointed to a photograph of a young man in a Whitestone uniform, mopping the floor, his eyes fixed on something outside the frame. That, she said, is my uncle Isaiah Boyd. He worked here for 9 years before being dismissed for speaking out about unfair treatment. I grew up hearing about him. My family called him a troublemaker. I believe them. Malik blinked. I didn't know he was part of this exhibit. Mrs. Hargrave continued. Didn't even know he had written letters. But tonight I read one. It said, one day maybe a student will find our names and remind this place that we were here too. Malik swallowed the lump rising in his throat. I'm sorry, he said softly, that you had to find him like this. Mrs. Hargrave shook her head. No, I'm grateful. You did something this school never had the courage to do. You remembered. She paused. My husband, he's proud, but also afraid. Change makes people like him feel like their place in history is being rewritten. But you're not erasing anyone. You're making room. Malik nodded slowly. I don't want revenge. I want truth. Mrs. Hargrave looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She hugged him briefly before walking away. Alone again in the exhibit, Malik stood in silence. But this silence didn't feel like retreat. It felt like reverence. The next morning, Rivera met him with an envelope. This came for you, she said, handing it over with a small smile. Inside was a formal invitation from the National Education Alliance. They wanted to create a traveling version of the Beneath the Floorboards exhibit, starting with a summer launch in Chicago. Malik's hands trembled as he read it. They want the whole exhibit. Replicated and expanded, Rivera confirmed. They want you to help curate, speak, lead workshops. Malik looked up. What about Whitestone? We'll keep the original, and we'll make it part of the curriculum moving forward. It's not going anywhere. By that afternoon, the news spread. Emails poured in. Former staff reached out. A retired custodian from Alabama sent a voice message. You did what we couldn't. God bless you, son. And still, Malik remained grounded because this wasn't a finish line. It was a handoff. At the final assembly of the school year, he was asked to give a closing speech, not as an honoree, not as a representative, but as a student. A peer. He stood once more on the same stage where he had received the headmaster's award. I used to think history was a line, straight, unchanging. But I've learned it's more like a quilt, stitched by many hands. Some of them trembling. Some of them denied thread for far too long. My part was just one patch. Yours might be next. He scanned the audience, students in caps and gowns, younger ones leaning forward in their seats. Speak when it's hard. Listen when it's uncomfortable. And never be afraid to dig beneath the floorboards. As the crowd rose in applause, Malik stepped back, letting the moment breathe. He wasn't the boy who had stood at the gates of Whitestone, pleading for a place. He was the young man who opened the gates for others. And now the world beyond those gates was waiting. The summer sun was already heavy in the sky when Malik returned to Whitestone Academy one last time. Her backpack was lighter than it had ever been. No books, no files, just a notebook, a pen, and his mother's old scarf tied around one strap. The school stood quiet in that strange in-between space when classes had ended, but the halls still remembered the echo of feet. Malik walked alone past the West Wing, where the cracked bricks bore the hidden stories he had helped uncover. Past the courtyard, where he'd once sat in tears, convinced he didn't belong. And finally to the portrait hall. The gallery was silent but glowing. The latest additions to the wall had been unveiled just the day before, framed photographs, plaques, and brief biographies of unsung staff members who had once been invisible. Names that had never been spoken aloud in that building were now engraved in brass. And there, near the center of the wall, nestled between a cook and a groundskeeper, was the name, Lena Johnson, Archivist of Hope. Malik froze. His fingers reached out, trembling slightly, brushing the cool metal letters. Rivera had kept it a surprise. His mother's journal entry was etched beside the name in elegant script. I swept these floors not for glory, but in the hope that one day my son might walk them with his head held high. Malik blinked back tears. He hadn't cried through the award, the exhibit launch, or the national invitation. But now, before this quiet tribute, he wept, not out of sadness, but out of peace. A soft shuffle of footsteps made him turn. Joseph stood at the entrance, cap in hand, his eyes already wet. She made it, he whispered. She always did, Malik said. Joseph came beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. She never wanted fame, just truth. She gave it to me first. They stood there in silence, father and son before a name that once lived only in memory. Later that day, Malik packed the last of his things from the small dorm room that had once felt like a prison. Now it felt like a chapter he'd finished writing. He tucked away his notes for the national exhibit, zipped up his bag, and headed to the administration office for one last meeting. Hargrave was there. So was Rivera. A few board members sat along the far wall, awkward but attentive. Mr. Johnson, Hargrave began, his tone less formal than usual. Before you go, we wanted to, extend a gesture. Malik folded his arms, cautious. We've created a fellowship in your name, Rivera said, stepping forward. The Malik Johnson Fellowship for Educational Equity. It will fund a full scholarship every year for a student from a working-class background with an interest in leadership and advocacy. Malik's jaw tightened. That's good, he said carefully. As long as it's not just a plaque on a brochure. It's not, Rivera said gently. It's a seed. Malik nodded once. Then thank you for choosing to plant it. As he left the office, Simone and Ellie were waiting outside, grinning wide. You're famous now, Ellie teased, holding up her phone. You're trending again. Malik groaned. Let me disappear for a week. Please. You can't, Simone said. Not when the country wants you in Chicago next month. Ellie smirked. Besides, you're not done. This isn't the end. Malik looked at them and smiled. No, it's just a different kind of beginning. That evening, a final gathering was held under the old maple tree. Students, staff, and alumni came with food, music, stories, no speeches, just joy. the kind of simple celebration his mother would have loved. As the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the lawn, Malik stood once more. He looked around at the people he'd fought beside, the ones who had doubted him, and then learned, the ones who hadn't known they were allowed to care until he gave them permission. He reached into his backpack and pulled out the original journal. His mother's handwriting was faded but strong. He opened to the last page, where a blank space had always made him wonder. And now, with a pen in hand, Malik wrote, "You were right, Mama. I walked with my head high. And now others will too." The next morning, he left campus for the last time, not with fear, but with purpose. And as the gates of Whitestone closed gently behind him, Malik Johnson walked into a world that now knew his name, and the names of those who came before. Because he had learned that history is not just remembered. It is rewritten, one voice at a time. The story of Malik Johnson teaches us that courage, truth, and persistence can break through even the oldest walls of prejudice. It reminds us that justice often begins with a single voice daring to speak the truth, and that remembering those who came before us is a powerful form of honoring their legacy. More than anything, it shows that real change doesn't always come through revolution, but through steady, unwavering steps toward dignity and recognition.